On the 28th of April 2026, King Charles III stood at the podium in the chamber of the United States House of Representatives and became only the second British monarch in history to address a joint session of Congress. His mother, Queen Elizabeth II, had done it in 1991. He did it 35 years later, at 77 years old, still managing a cancer diagnosis whose precise nature Buckingham Palace has declined to confirm in any clinical detail. In the middle of the most turbulent period the British monarchy has experienced in nearly a century, he received a standing ovation as he entered the chamber alongside President Donald Trump. Members of both the Senate and the House listened to his 20-minute address with an attention that produced multiple further standing ovations, particularly at the moment he invoked the principle that executive power is subject to checks and balances, a phrase delivered in a chamber where that principle was feeling, to many of those present, more urgently relevant than it had in some time. He made them laugh. He made them applaud. He told the story of reconciliation and renewal. And then he got back on a plane and went home. That image, a king with cancer standing in the legislature of the world's most powerful nation and commanding a room of the most powerful politicians on earth with a 20-minute speech about democracy and partnership and the long arc of history, is the image that cuts through all the noise surrounding Charles's reign and asks the question that actually matters. What kind of king is he, and what will his time as monarch mean when the historians finally sit down to write about it? The answer, more complex and more interesting than the tabloid version of his reign tends to suggest, is becoming clearer in 2026. Not because the noise has quietened, it has not. The noise, if anything, has never been louder, but because Charles has been on the throne for nearly 4 years now, long enough for the shape of his kingship to become visible beneath the crises and the controversies and the daily pressure of a role he waited 73 years to inhabit. He was the longest-serving heir apparent in British history. 73 years is longer than many monarchs have reigned in total. He was Prince of Wales from 1969, when he was invested at Caernarfon Castle in a ceremony that he had privately found somewhat absurd, describing it in later years with characteristic self-deprecating honesty as a bizarre and colorful piece of nonsense. He grew up in the particular difficulty of being an heir whose mother was young and healthy and showed every sign of reigning for a very long time, which she did. He had to create a role and then a purpose, and then a series of institutions and projects and positions on environmental and social questions, not because the job required it, but because the man required it. He needed to have something to do with the decades he was given. He needed to believe in something, and so he did. Long before it was fashionable, long before the scientific consensus was as clear as it now is, long before world leaders were standing up at UN summits to talk about climate change as the defining challenge of the century, Charles was already saying it. He was ridiculed for it. He was dismissed as a crank. He persisted anyway. The King's Trust is the most visible expression of what he built with those decades. Founded in 1976 as the Prince's Trust, when Charles was 27 years old and had received a naval severance payment that he chose to donate to a cause rather than keep, it became over nearly 50 years one of the most significant youth charities in British history. It has supported more than 1 million young people who faced barriers to employment, education, and enterprise. It operates in 26 countries. At the King's Trust International Gala at Rockefeller Center in Manhattan during the April 2026 state visit, Charles stood alongside Lionel Richie and Donatella Versace and an audience of business leaders and philanthropists and spoke about the young people the trust had helped, with the specific pride of someone who had been doing this for so long that the results were no longer abstract. He was not speaking about a program. He was speaking about 50 years of work, about 1 million individual lives that had been measurably different because he had turned a naval severance payment into a charity when he was 27. He's been doing this kind of thing, building institutions and causes and international networks around the things he believes in, his entire adult life. When he became king in September 2022, what he inherited was not a job from scratch. It was the culmination of a 50-year career, and that, crucially, is one of the things that makes his kingship different from any of his predecessors. He arrived at the throne not as a young person beginning to learn what it meant to govern, but as an older person who had spent a lifetime preparing, thinking, advocating, failing, being laughed at, persisting, and building things that outlasted the laughter. He knew what he wanted to do with the role before he had the role. And in the 4 years since he acceded, he has been doing it with a focus and a sense of purpose that the people who work closely with him describe in terms that are consistently surprising given everything else that is happening around him. The leading royal biographer who has watched his first years on the throne at close quarters put it simply and directly. He is the happiest he has ever been, the biographer said, in his role as monarch. That happiness is not the happiness of a man for whom everything is going well. Nothing about the external circumstances of Charles's reign could be described as going well. His brother is under criminal investigation. His younger son is estranged from him and from his family. His heir is in unspoken but real tension with him about the direction and pace of institutional change. His health is a daily variable in a way that no amount of positive medical messaging can entirely disguise. The specific type of cancer he has been fighting since early 2024 has never been publicly confirmed by the palace. The treatment was described in December 2025 as moving to a precautionary phase, a phrase that carries its own carefully managed ambiguity. His doctors are said to be continuously monitoring and reviewing his condition. He has said himself in a public speech during the U.S. state visit that he sees a future that he is optimistic about, but feels he will probably not get to witness himself. That sentence, delivered in the context of environmental progress, but carrying a weight that nobody listening could avoid feeling, was the kind of candor about his own mortality that his mother would never have permitted herself in public and that Charles offered as naturally as if it were simply a fact to be stated. He has made a decision, unusual in the history of his family and his role, to be honest about what he does not know about the time he has left. In the December 2025 Stand Up to Cancer broadcast, speaking from Clarence House in a message he personally authorized, he said that a cancer diagnosis can feel overwhelming. He said that early diagnosis had saved his life. He said, testimony that I hope may give encouragement to the 50% of us who will be diagnosed with the illness at some point in our lives. He turned his own medical crisis into a public health message. He put his face and his voice and his personal experience on something that millions of people were silently struggling with, and that the British public health system needed public figures to speak about honestly. He did not do it because his communications team thought it would help his approval ratings, though it probably did. He did it because he believes in it, because early detection genuinely does save lives, and because the monarchy, at its best, is a platform from which useful things can be said to a large number of people who would not otherwise be reached. His sausage fingers, as the tabloids called the visible swelling in his hands during the U.S. trip, generated a wave of concerned coverage that the palace's medical advisors addressed carefully and without full disclosure. Fluid pooling was the explanation offered by one expert, a known side effect of certain cancer treatments. He carried on through it. At the climate reception at St. James's Palace on the 24th of June 2026, the hottest June day ever recorded in Britain, he stood in a historic building with no air conditioning, where guests were handed folding fans on arrival and a nurse was on standby in case anyone became unwell, and he talked to world leaders about methane emissions and climate diplomacy. and the urgency of environmental action. His master of the household held an electric fan for him. He dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief. He joked with the president of the UN Climate Change Conference about the heat. He kept going. This is the quality that defines his reign more than any single decision or any specific controversy. The keeping going, not despite the cancer and the family crisis and the institutional turbulence and the weight of 77 years lived inside a role that never entirely accommodated the man inside it, but alongside all of those things, carrying them and still showing up, because showing up is what he decided long ago that his life was for. The private secretary who has worked with him described, in terms that were not entirely comfortable to deliver, a king who is more focused and more purposeful than at any previous point in his adult life. He knows what he wants his legacy to be, he knows how much time he may have to build it, and he is not wasting a day of it. What does he want that legacy to be? The answer, assembled from his speeches and his actions and the institutions he has built and the causes he has championed, is reasonably clear. He wants to be remembered as the king who treated the monarchy as a platform for addressing real problems in the world rather than as an exercise in ceremonial continuity. He wants to be remembered as the monarch who was honest about his own health in ways that encouraged ordinary people to seek early diagnosis, and who turned that honesty into advocacy that may have saved lives. He wants to be remembered for the Congress speech, for the standing in the chamber of American democracy and saying that the story of the UK and the US is at its heart a story of reconciliation, renewal, and remarkable partnership at a moment when those words were not empty diplomatic formula, but a deliberate and pointed argument for the value of international cooperation in a world that was being pulled toward insularity. He wants to be remembered for the environmental work that began decades before it was fashionable, and that his own Earthshot Prize continues through his son. He wants to be remembered for the king's trust and the million young people it has supported over 50 years. He wants to be remembered as the king who finally, however painfully and however belatedly, drew a line under what his brother represented and said that the institution was not going to protect what the institution could not defend. He may also be remembered for what he could not control. The timing of his reign has been uniquely cruel in certain respects. He became king at 73, meaning that the vigor and vision he might have brought to the role at 50 or 60 arrived instead in a body that was already managing the accumulated burdens of age and then the additional burden of cancer. He inherited a family that was already fractured, a brother who was already a liability, a younger son who had already left. He arrived at the throne carrying other people's crises as well as his own, and he has been dealing with them imperfectly as all institutions deal with crises, but with a consistency of effort that the historical record will eventually have to acknowledge. Inside the palace, the question of what comes after Charles is being managed with a care that the people involved are at great pains not to describe as planning for the succession, because planning for the succession while the current monarch is still on the throne is constitutionally and personally awkward in ways that require very precise navigation. But William is being described by multiple insiders as having already begun secret meetings to plan his own coronation. The word secret is doing considerable work in that sentence. The meetings are real. They are happening. William is not waiting for his father to die before he begins the work of preparing for the reign that will follow, and nobody who understands how these transitions work could reasonably expect him to. Coronations take years to plan. Constitutional arrangements require long lead times. The institutional mechanics of a royal transition are vast and complex. That William is thinking about all of this is not a sign of impatience or disloyalty, it is a sign of competence. But the coexistence of a reigning king and a preparing heir creates a tension that no amount of professional goodwill and institutional protocol can entirely manage away. William is ready. He has been ready in some ways for years. He has the vision, the communication strategy, the public mandate, the approval ratings, and the personal philosophy for his future reign already largely formed. He has moved his family to Forest Lodge. He has begun reshaping the duchy. He has established himself as the institution's most effective public face. He is waiting. And waiting for a man of Charles's particular combination of purpose and urgency and unsettled family situation is its own particular kind of pressure. The future of the crown in the period immediately following Charles's reign is not uncertain in its basic structure. William will be king, Catherine will be queen, George will be the heir. The line is clear, and it is supported by polling numbers that give the Wales household stronger public approval than any other configuration of the monarchy in recent memory. What is uncertain is the shape of the institution they will inherit. Whether Andrew's situation will have been fully resolved by the time William takes the throne, or will remain a legal and reputational liability. Whether Harry will have found some form of accommodation with the family, or will remain in California, outside the institution, a parallel royal story running beside the official one, but never quite rejoining it. Whether the Commonwealth realms will have continued their gradual move toward republic status, reducing the crown's formal reach even as its influence in other domains remains significant. Whether the public's appetite for the monarchy, measured in those slow-moving but real polling declines among younger generations, will have been stabilized or reversed by the Wales household's modernization project. Charles cannot answer those questions. Nobody can. What he can do, and what he is doing, with a determination that has surprised even people who have known him for decades, is continue. He will go to Bermuda. He will attend the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Antigua in November 2026. He will see his grandchildren Archie and Lilibet when Harry brings them to the UK in July for the first time in 4 years, because he has decided that a grandfather's relationship with his grandchildren is not a bargaining chip in an institutional negotiation, but a human right that no amount of family fracture should be allowed to permanently foreclose. He will keep signing the red boxes. He will keep attending the engagements. He will keep making the speeches. He will keep being fanned by aides in heat waves and dabbing his forehead with handkerchiefs and joking with climate envoys about the irony of it all. And somewhere in all of that, in the keeping going, in the refusing to stop, in the cancer-fighting, institution-managing, family-navigating, parliament-addressing, climate-advocating determination to still be there when tomorrow comes, the legacy of King Charles III is being written. Not as he perhaps imagined it when he was finally crowned in May 2023, not as the clean, triumphant beginning of a well-planned reign, but as something more complicated and in some ways more honest than that. As the reign of a man who had waited a very long time and who used the time he had with everything he could find. That, when the noise finally settles and the historians finally write, is what it will say. He kept going, and the crown went with him.